Oh, hi there, friends. Mandy here. Restorative grief is all about creating easy access to healing no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, my 31-day guidebook is available to order on Amazon. Embracing our losses without losing ourselves is a reflective journey into the holistic needs of grievers and learning to support yourself, mind, heart, body, and spirit. Don't just wing it. You can lean into grief work with a guide. The link for the book and more are available in the show notes, and as always, you can reach out with questions. But for now, let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 183, titled Actively Attending Our Inner World with Andrew Lang. Have you ever wondered what life could be like if you leaned into what you wanted to feel, do, think, or experience? Andrew Lang is an educator in the Pacific Northwest and author of the award-winning book, Unmasking the Inner Critic, Lessons for Living an Unconstricted Life. Along with writing regularly, he facilitates workshops helping people to navigate their inner lives and explore their sense of identity and spirituality. Today, we'll explore his insights on embracing practices around a loss of identity and how attending to our inner world with intention leads to personal and collective transformation. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today I am so honored and excited to bring to you author, educator, and spiritual teacher Andrew Lang. His work is invitational and open and brings his readers and his students into a more compassionate relationship with themselves and the world around them. So if you have been around for any minute of time with me, you know that that's exactly what we're trying to build in restorative grief world. So Andrew is obviously a perfect guest. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
It is wonderful to be here. I'm so excited.
Me too. We found each other on Instagram and it was one of those moments where I'm like, "Ooh, that aligns with my perspective. That aligns with my okay, that aligns. All right, we need to be friends. This is a good fit."
Yep. It's one of the joyful parts of Instagram is finding and connecting with people who share common stories or threads or just can find some piece that resonates and pull on it and be like, let's be friends.
Yeah. In a way that isn't creepy and weird, but in a way that is like,
Yes.
"Hey, we can actually build one another and grow together alongside each other." So,
Yeah.
let's dive in. Let's dive into why this resonates because your work invites people to sit in discomfort, invites them to recognize, hey, this is not quite what you're wanting, but it feels vulnerable and transformative if you'll remain in it. So, how do you utilize that in your teaching, that presence with discomfort? And what does it teach you about the grief process so far?
Yeah, so much good there. Um, so one of the things I focus on most is around how are we questioning the stories that we have been handed? And also, how are we consistently creating a practice around questioning the stories as we develop them ourselves? Because we're always in a co-creation process, right? Like the world happens to us and around us and with us, and we're always navigating, this is a story that's forming within me, and how does this connect with a story that was handed to me? And so I think a lot of my work with folks is taking the stories that people have been handed, whether that is by their families or by their spiritual traditions, uh, and deciding and really through a questioning process, does this still fit for me? Does this fit who I am? Does this fit my lifestyle? Does this fit who I feel I'm becoming? And regardless of the answer or with whatever answer comes up, how do we then move and dance from that space? And I think that's so much of the grief aspect comes in right there because there's grief in looking and identifying that the story that you were handed maybe no longer works or fits quite right. And there's grief in the oh moment of, well, who am I without that story? Or, I think about folks who grow up in really high control spaces, and so high control is what they know, both the comforting parts of that for them as it is familiar, and the deeply uncomfortable parts, that anxiety and afraid of doing the wrong thing. The moment of shifting and the questioning that story can bring up so much. So that's where I kind of enter this space from, is how are we doing that story work? How are we questioning, like, what are our beliefs about ourselves, our dignity, our worth? What are our beliefs about the world and the kind of big picture cosmos around us, the just everything around us? And then what do we believe and what is our connection with what do we believe about our relationship with the world and the cosmos, and where is our responsibility there?
I think what you mentioned there really touches on that loss of identity, right? Just to name it for people, because that's one that's very often disenfranchised. We think grief has to be a death, and we don't recognize a younger self, an identity we've lived within, dying and falling away is something that needs to be mourned and something that deserves some curiosity around it too. I'm curious, what is something that you would say is a sign that someone's ready to start doing this work, that someone recognizes, okay, I have this identity loss, or I'm struggling, or I'm now moving away from high control situations or an environment that didn't serve me well. And now I'm starting to see it for the first time. What are some things people can look for in themselves that would give them a flag of like, hey, maybe now's a good time to start doing some intentional work around that?
One of the most important ones I'll share from my life, but also this is resonate with a lot of folks I work with, is it's some of the body signals. So noticing when, like, even the simple ones, you're in a meeting and you're finding yourself tapping on your leg, and then there's a pattern of it.
Mhm.
Or you're talking to a specific person and you get that ick feeling, and then that ick feeling comes back next time and next time. All of those, or like for me, being in certain conversations that you don't feel equipped to be in, and all of a sudden feeling sweaty, or having the hair on your arm stand up, right? Like some of those body sensations and behaviors, I think those are flags for us. Those are indicators for us that there's something here. And so when we attune to them, and I think that's where we then there's a skillfulness and a choicefulness that we're invited into, is do we want to listen to that part of our body's knowing and take the next step of questioning, right? What's going on here? Or are we not in a space for that? And so that, I think that would be one of the first places I start with folks is, you know, what is your body? What are you aware of that your body's already trying to tell you, or wave a flag at least?
Mhm.
And then just start questioning what's making you sweat? What's making you want to get out of that room?
Literally, what is making you sweat about this?
Yeah.
Yes, the somatic wisdom we carry, that bodily wisdom, the body pushing back and saying, like, hey, pay attention, is so easily minimized in our culture because there's a sense of obligation when we make a commitment. There's a sense of, I've said yes to this person, these people, this place, and I am a person who stands by my word. I don't back down. I don't disappoint. I don't say no. And we can identify that on the outside as, very porous boundaries that are unhelpful. But I'm curious what you would say to the person that feels that strong sense of obligation and starts criticizing that sensation within them, or gaslighting themselves, or just talking themselves out of that true awareness of what they're experiencing.
Yeah. So this is where story and practice come together, right? It's like so often we can we want something. I'll speak for me. I've had moments where I really don't want to get aggravated about this, but then I get aggravated about it, and then I kind of beat myself up about it. Well, those are all narratives. Those are all beliefs I have about who I should be. That's my should monster showing up. And the practice part is, how often have I practiced any other way of being? Um, and so what I really try to practice for myself is when I feel like control issues popping up for me, or when I feel like I'm getting out of control, or I'm scared of the unknown. What happens for me is my shoulders go up, my shoulders tense almost every time. And so one of my practices is, how do I build resilience for that? I practice walking around with my shoulders totally relaxed and being very aware of it. And so my narratives, when my shoulders tense up, I get angry, I feel out of control, instead of beating myself up about it, instead of all those shoulds, I can say, "Oh, I still need to practice that a little bit more. I still need to practice recognizing that my shoulders go up in that, and practice the act of letting them go, and letting the and also just being playful with it. I think there's an element of seriousness in all of these different modalities of inner work. There's an element of seriousness that I think so rips out the playfulness and the ridiculousness of the human experience. That if we can center first and like it's weird being human,
Mm.
it's a strange thing, uh, then we can move in a little bit lighter of a way with our narratives as well as our practices.
There's a great quote, and I'm not going to remember who said it, but I saw it again on Instagram the other day. It's, "You are a ghost driving a meat covered skeleton made from stardust, riding a rock floating through outer space. Fear nothing." And I have heard it before, but I ran across it again, and I just love it. It's not to minimize our fears or our worries or our serious moments that we need to honor. It is to invite the lens of playfulness back into the scenario to recognize, well, what if we are just a meat bag? And at the same time, that it is the most precious experience, super important to honor the wisdom of said meat bag, to move
Yeah.
through all of the meaning that we've created about our stories and our experiences. It's a huge, you're asking for a very huge shift in approach and mentality. And I'm curious, how do you witness that happening for people who are coming out of high control scenarios? I know a lot of our listeners are probably in or recovering from high control communities.
Yeah. I'll share a story that hopefully gets to this. A few years ago, I have a friend, James, who's a local poet here in the Tacoma area, and we go for a walk, and he called it a ramble. Let's go for a ramble. And I had no idea what that meant. It was just a giant mystery to me. But I was like, all right. And we go, and we're at a local park here in Tacoma, and we're walking along a trail, and all of a sudden he goes off trail and disappears over like kind of, it's not a cliff edge, but it's definitely a cliff edge. And he's just gone, and I like tiptoe up to the edge and look down, and there he is climbing down the face of this. It wasn't really a cliff; it was a hill, but climbing down this hill using the tree root system as handholds all the way down. This was out of my element entirely. This is, you stick to the trail. That's what has been told. That's the rules. And I gave myself permission. I said, okay, it's either me way up here and James way down there, or I'm gonna go, and it's not too dangerous, so let's do it. And I climb down after him. We get to the bottom, and it's a beach, and we're walking along the beach now, and James does his second big wisdomous move. Uh, at least it became wisdom for me. I'm not sure he was thinking much of it at all. And he jumps up on a log, a beach log, and just starts walking along the beach log like a little 5 year, like one of my kids do. And I had this moment of total tension in my body, not that dissimilar from right above at like the top of the cliff, where we are adults. Why are you walking along a beach log? And I didn't join him, but I kept reflecting on it. And I had actually, just a couple of days ago, I was out walking a different part of that beach with my partner, and she took a picture of me walking along. I jumped up on the rocks, the kind of the big rocks near the beach, and those moments for me were big reminders that we practice our way out of the narratives, or we practice our way through the narratives we were handed. So coming out of a high control space, it's almost certainly not going to work. It's certainly not going to work for everybody, that you will be able to convince yourself with reason and logic and just shifting narratives um, into a more healed space. There's a practice and an embodiment that goes with it. So for me on that beach, you know, I wasn't ready yet to walk on the beach logs. That was too much for me. That was too much out of my element. Uh, but the practice of it is what builds resilience. And so here I am 2 years later, maybe not walking on beach logs every single time I'm on a beach, but I'm willing to. And I do jump on the big rocks, and I jump from place to place. And so I think that's when I work with folks coming from high control spaces, I really emphasize what is the practice of your becoming. We can talk and we can process the narratives and the stories you hold, and that's like really important here. And what are the daily activities that you're doing that begin to build some capacity in you to lead to do something different, or to craft or co-create a different narrative going forward.
You said something, I think it's the second time now, that who are we becoming? And that's a question I often ask people. And I think when it comes to whether you're in a high control situation or not, I think about the idea of personality versus true self. And I hear people push back on work like this, on these practices that are lighthearted, that are playful, thinking that it is dishonoring, that it's not mature, not that it's not serious, but that it's not adult like. It's not something that would generate people to respect me or trust me or follow me, whatever it is they're looking for. How much of that should language comes in there to protect that personality? And how do you help people recognize what is personality versus what is that true self really starting to surface?
Mm. The first thought that comes to me is just always beginning with that reminder that we're meat bags moving around with other meat bags. Uh, so there is an element of beginning with that humor and lightness. I also think working with folks around identifying what feels good and what
Mm.
doesn't can be really, really powerful. There's actually, I have a note on my desk and it says, "What would it look like if this were fun?"
Oh, I love that.
And I think that's a powerful question. Or asking yourself, um, what would this feel like? How would this feel good for me? Um, at the very beginning of our cohort, one of the first exercises we do, the cohort is all around building practices and resilience, so that you live with a little bit more presence and intention in your life. And one of the first things we do is we have this exercise where we take a few minutes and we just journal out, what does your body want more of? What does your body want less of? And those two questions seem to get at a depth that so often in a Western culture that kind of has taught us, so many of us, to live up in our heads. It gets at a depth that, at least in my experience, really opens quite a few of us up to thinking, oh, um, there is a yearning within me that I have not been able to tap into because the question hasn't been the one. The question I've been asking isn't the one for this season of my life. So I think that's one place to start. Is it's not, when I think about like true self, it's really hard for me to cognitively wrap my head around, like, who am I becoming? Can I have a list of that person's attributes so that I can like build
Yes.
towards that? It feels more in trajectory with who I assume I am becoming when I ask myself what feels good. What would it look like if this were fun? What would it look like if this helped build the values in my relationship that I would like to
Mhm.
embody? I also think about challenge. Like, what challenge do I need to lean into so that I can learn, not in a cognitive way necessarily, but so that I can learn how to take the next step. James actually has a beautiful poem. His full name is James A. Pearson. I highly recommend his poetry, but he has this beautiful poem, and I think it's called How to Build a Tree. And I'm not even going to try to quote it, but at the very end, he gets to this essence of all, um, sometimes all a tree knows is the next day, the next second, the next. And similar to the humans, like maybe all we need to know is our next halting step. Um, and it's okay if we don't have that perfectly fleshed out picture of true self at the end, because also it might not be at the end, right? Like that true self piece is a evolving part of our process.
Really appreciated how you identified maybe it's not about a list of attributes or characteristics, because personally speaking, in my work, we work with values, core values a lot, but that never just a let's slap that value on as a label. It's let's use that label as a lens as a part of our decision making and who we're becoming, like how you flesh out the things you want and the things you want to do and the things you want to learn and what you want less of. And I think when I introduce this concept, the idea of attributes and characteristics is the first thing that comes to mind for people. They want a set list of I am good, I am faithful, I am kind, I am helpful, I am spiritual, whatever they want to place over it. Removing that feels like a very rough and scratchy and critical place because we've been told we have to have these characteristics. Are you living in a way that everyone can tell you're generous? Are you living in such a way that everyone can see that you are trustworthy? How does that um, inner critic moment where we say, I can't not be trustworthy, I can't not say that's what I'm building toward? Um, how would you deal with the person that can articulate that can, in so many of their own words, get to the point where they say, don't tell me I can't just have a list of who I want to be when I grow up because that's my goal. What do you say to help disarm that inner critic right in that moment in a loving way that doesn't say the inner critic is garbage because they're not?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, totally. First thought I immediately have is like, it's okay to have the list, right? Like, it's okay to have that list if that list brings you life, or if that list in some way comforts you. Like, great, have it, enjoy it, love the list. And instead of seeing it as the end all be all single point of destination, what would it look like to see? This would be like my, I think, working with someone one-on-one. How do we move in the trajectory? How do we hold the trajectory lightly? I'm imagining like an airplane when it's going from point A to point B. It's actually wobbling all over the place and kind of like redirecting as it goes. Um, but how do we move in a trajectory that feels good, not necessarily cemented to this is the destination? And I talk with my partner about this a lot. We're getting married this next summer, and we've always had this conversation in an ongoing way of partnership right now is going to look different, obviously. And the person we're choosing to partner with each day is an evolving agreement and an evolving sense of partnership as well. And so, I know that when we talk about marriage, we're not marrying each other forever. We're marrying the person who's right in front of us with a statement of a commitment and a deep commitment to like keep working with the two people who are becoming, even though we have no idea who that is. So we're agreeing with we're going to go in a trajectory. We're going to go in two trajectories actually, but maintain contact, maintain intimacy. And I think that is a space that we can work on around have the list if you want to have the list, but can we focus more on this gentle holding of a trajectory that you want to go in rather than this single point must be the end? And I truly do. I think a lot of us who grew up in religious spaces, we got sold that space that there is a destination point, and if you are in any of the 7 billion other ways, any other destination was bad. Um, and I think that's a big narrative to shift of, if that's still vital to you, okay, but let's loosen the grip on the trajectory and the way we get there. Um, because then we can loosen our grip on the shoulds and our sense of self as someone to be controlled in every moment.
I want to pause on that for a moment just because I don't know if anyone listening understood that you just blew up a lot of the way that marriage and partnership is taught to our culture, but it's important to recognize that willingness to say both and. I am with you, and we are evolving into new people as we go. It's no longer this linear process, but instead you're sitting in this. I have this vision of sitting in the middle of a space with a person, and the atmosphere around you is expanding as if you have more access to more things and you're still committed to one another. But instead of going on this linear as we get old, it's that phrase, I want to get old with you. I want to grow with you is such a different approach, but that's essentially the essence of what you're saying. And that mindset shift is so much more than a mindset shift, but it is a really, really, really expansive open door for someone as well.
Yeah. When I first started doing some of the work that I do now, this is 10 years ago, I began working exclusively with men. And one of the phrases, specifically older men, midlife crisis, 40s, 50s, and above, really questioning, like, I had a vision for my life and it hasn't quite turned out. What do I do
Yeah.
now? And so many of the men in that space would use phrases like, to refer to their partners as like old ball and chain, like some of those really gross, gross
Yeah.
statements. And it comes from a space of seeing marriage as I'm locking in. Like, right, like we are deciding to be on this Titanic. Titanic is a bad reference. We are deciding to be on this ship.
Yeah.
And that's the ship we're on. And I think there's such, it's scary because that's the vision, like that's the framework that's been taught. It's scary to
Yeah.
expand, and to look at different ways of thinking about marriage. But for my partner and I, at least, it's a really beautiful thing for us to look at each other and say, today we're choosing
Yeah.
this, and we're committing to making choices in an ongoing way. And I mean, just in the last 3, 4, 5 years, there's been so many changes, both personally and as a communal
Yeah.
on a communal
Yeah.
level. Uh, how could I say that, every that I know where the cemented final destination is gonna be? I got no
Yeah.
idea. And so we're gonna ride it out for right now together and be very committed to that
Yeah.
trajectory.
There's an active nature in these choices as well. And I think recognizing and even grieving over passive choices we've made, things we've made out of
Yeah.
a sense of obligation or of prior commitment or fear, those choices becoming active and intentional allow for a lot of freedom and a lot of healing in ourselves as well.
Connection is always an active
Yeah.
choicefulness for me, right? Like when we talk about connection, so I don't use much religious language anymore or spiritual language, but when I do use spiritual language, really it's a shortcut word for
Sure.
connection. And when I think about connection, I think, um, it's always active. And whenever you have an experience with another person where the connection starts to be lacking, almost inevitably, there is an active posture that has been backed off of, or a passive, posture has kicked in. And so thinking through what are we actively doing to connect in every moment of our lives is a big question of my personal life, but also of my work. Just like, how are we remaining in um, this active
Yeah.
mindset?
That's one of the things that I remember connecting with, resonating with in your work too, is because that integrative approach that I try to teach with people, heart, mind, body, spirit. When I get to spirit, same idea. I phrase it as this is your sense of connection to yourself, to others, to your community, to the world, and to your understanding of spirituality, whatever that looks like, because otherwise there is no purpose in spirituality if it's not to lean toward a connection with yourself or with others. And so that I think is such a gentle way to take it away from the obligatory and rigid religious experience that people connect the dots with in that language around the word spirit. Um,
Yeah. The other thing that comes to my mind, and it's really, I think, important for me, is that connection is also what makes solidarity
mm,
possible. And I mean solidarity in like a really big, broad way, but being able to say, my experience sees your experience. They are different, but they see each other. Or my grief sees your grief. My experience of grief sees you in your moment of grief or in your process of grief. Um, and then to the in the shape of our society, being able to say, my experience as a human being, because I am, allows for me to connect with the experience of this other human being who might be vastly different from me and yet still has inherent dignity. That is a deep question of connection, and creates the conditions whereby like acts of solidarity can really take
yeah,
place. And I think that the personal inner work can never be fully removed really at all from the communal work and from the solidarity work. So I think that's a vital
I
piece as
agree.
well.
They're integral. I just wrote something the other day on the same language is my communal health relies on me as a healthy person. And to be a healthy person, it relies on a healthy community around me. They're part and parcel. Um, Andrew, what are some of the authors and teachers and people that have inspired you in this work for people who are maybe not ready to say, I want to do this thing. I'm 100%. When's the next cohort? But they're saying something here resonates and I just would love to read more. I know you are an author, so please talk about your books as well. But who else inspired you to start going down this path?
It's a strange hodgepodge of
Perfect.
folks. I love, so the trauma specialist Resma Menachem is one of the most influential voices on all of my work. Um, so Resma for sure. His book Grandmother's Hands has been influential. He also has a book that not a lot of people pick up recently. It's called The Quaking of
It's in my
America,
stack.
and
I've
it
been
is,
reading it for months. It's phenomenal.
yeah, I it is so good and hard
Uh-huh.
hitting. It's definitely one of those like couple pages at a time and then sit down and like process the regulation
Yes.
of your nervous
Yeah.
system.
So just to tell people, it is a book about the racialization of politics in America over the last like 5 years. And by the time this episode airs, the election will be done, and who knows where the hell we'll be. But it was written not in a like predictive way, but in a hey, when shit gets real, here's how to regulate yourself somatically. And it's brilliant. And you're exactly right. I sit down and I'll read 2 or 3 pages and then think, okay, when I think I know something, I know nothing. Let me sit with this again.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very
Yeah.
active. So I mean, once again, like there's parts of it with that really connect with me around like, all right, I should create a safety plan for my family and I, like my partner and I should sit down and like figure out like when shit hits the fan, what are we doing? One of the questions, and I'll get back to the
Yeah.
books, but one of the questions that my partner and I have been talking about in the last few months is the question of um, when violence happens near us, what are we willing to do? And I think that's a question for so many of us in the discomfort of it to find a way to sit with in some way and to navigate, what are we willing to do? Um, and maybe willing is the wrong word. What are we preparing to do? Let's make it more active.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think for many of us who have uh, comfort and privilege, you can see stuff happening even 5 miles away and still choose to
Yeah.
stay at home. And I think that's a question that just helps you get real around your story and how it connects with your story of the world and the cosmos. Is like, what are you preparing to do
Yeah.
for this? Um, so
Back
back
to
to
back.
books. Resma Menachem, phenomenal. I also truly love Mirabai Starr. She is I don't know how to describe, interspiritual
Yeah.
mystic, uh, amazing human. But her book Wild Mercy has had a really big impact on me. Um, and it's just a beautiful writing. She it's somewhere between poetry and prose, and she just brings out so many voices of these powerful, um, just especially mystics, just like these powerful mystics from the past. So I highly recommend Mirabai Star. And then there's just like Gabor Mate is constantly a voice that is informing me as I go. In my past life, Richard Rohr was one of my like consistent book
Mm-hmm.
reads. Once again, I spend less time in the religious space now, but that was as I was moving from being especially religious to not so much. Richard Rohr was a huge help for me in understanding where my story was and all of that.
I'm also reading Wild
Um,
Mercy right now. So I wasn't joking when I said we found each other on Instagram and it was awkward and wonderful. That's hilarious. As you started to say that, I was like, wow, wow, universe, good job. Um,
yeah.
the availability of a person's nervous system when they are in the middle of upending their lives because of some kind of loss of identity is very limited. So, how would you recommend? Because let's be real, Resma Manicum and Mirabai Star are not light reading. No,
No.
they are people that both you and I have come to, maybe by way of Richard Rohr. I still love his work significantly. And yet, even that is hard to enter into. So when someone is like aware of their need to shift, what is one small activity, one practice, one gentle opening that you would recommend to someone to really begin to soften toward themselves and ask more questions of their practices so they can eventually approach these more significant resources?
I'll share two quick practices because you asked for one. There, and but I think they go together really well. So one is something I call the right sizing
Okay.
practice, and it's a quick one to do, and it's just always interesting to watch your body. But what it is you find yourself kind of an equilibrium stance, whether you're standing or sitting, doesn't really matter. And then you make yourself as slowly as big as you possibly can. You know, arms outstretched, big and tall and high, and legs kicked out, and just make yourself really big and feel what it feels like to be super big. And then you slowly bring yourself down and you constrict yourself as little as little as little, knees bent, tucked, hard to breathe because your chest is folded over, right? Like as tight and as small as you can. And you pause and you feel what that feels like. And then you come back to equilibrium and you do that 2 or 3 times. And where I find that practice being so powerful is that so many of us have been taught stories about the shape of who we are supposed to be and the size and the amount of space we are supposed to take up. And playing with that in our bodies and recognizing, once again, asking that question of like, what feels good, and finding what's that space that feels good for me. Um, and what is the shape that I've been in? What is the shape I would like to lead, to move through my life a little bit more in? I think those are all really good questions and soft ways to enter into, um, once again, kind of that body forward aspect of what is my body telling me. The other practice that I highly recommend, um, I just call it the questioning practice, but it's a process of figuring out what are the questions you hold. Because for us, in my experience, questions are the things that actually, point me in a direction. Point to use the word trajectory again for the 10th time, right? Point me in a trajectory. And so the questioning practice is you get a piece of paper and you write down an issue, whatever's alive for you. You write it at the top, whether it's a problem, an issue, or just a challenge you have, or just something about yourself, right? Like write down anything. And then you spend 10 minutes and you write every single question you could possibly write about that, topic or
Yeah.
focus. And no rights or wrongs, no judgments. And you end up with this page littered with these ridiculous questions. And I say ridiculous in the sense of like all over the
Yeah.
place. And some questions are easily answered, some of them aren't. And then you go through and you just identify what are most potent for me right now. Might be different tomorrow, but what are the most potent questions that are really resonating deeply with
Mhm.
me? And you take those questions, maybe figure out what's your one question, and you go out for a walk with it. Um, and you know, I think there's so much value in identifying the questions we want to move with. Last thing, I'm gonna add a third. Also, just get a poetry book. That was I did. There's not enough authors. There's not enough time for me to say all the authors, but like I think, yeah, Richard Rohr and Resm, like there's so much. Getting a poetry book that's grounded in nature, Mary Oliver, like finding someone who speaks in a way that really brings light to your
Yeah.
bones. I think it can be so
The
valuable.
beauty of poetry is it's not concrete. It's completely up for your interpretation.
Exactly.
And that really removes that expectation of getting it right or having a black and white conclusion or understanding it in the correct framework so that you can apply it like it's a logical math problem. I think that's a lovely piece of third advice. I appreciate that. And that curiosity of a questioning practice is really that willingness to say, I also will walk with this question and not have an answer potentially, and not come with a conclusion at the end. And I think that that's also huge to acknowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. The questioning practice comes from two places. So I one is I was a teacher for and I still work in education during the day. And so I developed that with my students pretty consistently. We use that practice all the time for all the things. Both inner life stuff when my kids were going through. I remember 2016, the day after the election. What was the one of the first things we did? We sat down and we used that practice to guide
Wow.
us. Now, in this class of kids that were undocumented and kids that were far right wing, and these kids that were just having no idea how to hold something so big in this moment, alongside peers that had all the different
Yeah.
thoughts. Um, and experiences. So I think that's one space. And the other area that it was informed by is asset-based community development.
Mm.
And that's the organizer aspect. of like the questions are what allow um, doors to
Yeah.
open. And so we've just working with our capacity to ask the right question, not the right questions, ask the questions for
The
this
helpful
moment.
question right now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Andrew, this has been incredible. You have a weekly Wednesday 1, 2, 3 email resource that you send out that people can sign up for. So we'll have the links for that and for James's poetry and even all to those books that you mentioned. But what was one last thought you want to leave someone with today? What is the period at the end of the sentence for someone today who's grieving, who's heard all of this, who's inspired and excited and a little bit fearful, but also really curious about what they can gain?
I think when we touched upon the active nature of this, it really struck a chord in me around like the active nature of tending to our inner life, whether that's the grief aspect or the identity aspect or the true self, who am I becoming question, but the active process of tending, just like a garden, you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. And so I think that's my final thought is just really giving ourselves as fully as we are capable of in a safe and feeling good way, but giving ourselves to what is my act of tending
Mm,
today and see where that takes us after 3 days, 4 days, 5 days.
I love it. Andrew, thank you for making space and for sharing your vast, inspiring wisdom. I'm so grateful for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to episode 183 of Restorative Grief. Becoming curious, connecting with our inner worlds, and honoring the part of us that wants to play and move is such a gift to ourselves. Andrew's work and emphasis on exploring the practices that serve us and help us feel more embodied and real with ourselves is also a gentle reminder that we are worthy of the time and intention it takes to heal, both inside and out. If this is the first time you've listened to the show, thank you for being here. Please be sure to check the show notes for a link to Andrew's work as well as the books and poetry he named in the episodes. And his Wednesday 1, 2, 3 teaching emails are full of incredible insight and generosity. So when you sign up, you'll be inspired and notified of his next cohort timing too. Lastly, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review if you appreciated this episode, and maybe consider becoming a patron of the show as well. The workbook for this episode is going to be incredible. So if you are a current patron, remember to download it so you can bring all of this beautiful work into your own life. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.